$500 million from defence. The Treasurer now admits that's the case. So you were looking for real cuts, and there's a pretty big chunk.
Well, there are some cuts, but if it's a budget of true Labor values, then it properly reflects the fact that the budget doesn't tell the truth. Is where the government has gone soft. There are other areas where the government's just serving on higher revenues.
So you would go much harder?
Well, if you're serious about a surplus, Chris, you have to go harder. The government's not serious.
So how much harder would you go?
Well, that's up to the circumstances at the time, but this government is relying on a $39 billion increase in revenue. $34 billion. And they're claiming it's a tough budget? Well, it's a handout budget.
All right, well, let's go through some of the things that they have done. $500 million from defence, as I said, is that something you would support?
Look at the case, obviously. But cutting back on frontline services is not a good idea at the Yes.
Would they be larger or smaller than? Well, you said that they were going soft, so one assumes you would go harder. So could you find more money in defence from?
Well, we'll find savings, but the government is surfing on higher taxes. It's an incredibly confused budget. It's got no about the economy. It's going to disappoint a lot of people. There's no about productivity. There's nothing about growth. Unemployment is going to increase. The government's forecasts from last year have proven to be false. What we mean is a $22 billion blowout in the deficit this year, and they expect us to believe they're going to have
gone, that you would be in power sometime in the not too distant future. So we're trying to work out whether or not you are going to be continued policy erosion, or we're going to start to see some of the coffee beans. So what we're seeing, $1 cut from.
Well, Millennium Gold.
You won't. So you do support that move.
Well, you have to get the budget back into surplus by making hard decisions.
Let's just be clear. You that would happen. So did the government. So it would be a.
Let me help you here, Chris.
Yeah.
We are not going to support the cash handout to people before the end of the financial year.
Why not?
Well, because it's got nothing to do with education. It's everything to do with the carbon tax.
But it's targeted at low-income earners. Is there something your party has against it?
No, it is a cash bribe for the carbon tax. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. It's a sugar hit. It's all about the carbon tax. It's got nothing to do with education.
One of the reasons that we know it is because we've seen it before under the Howard government. We saw payments sent out to people on a not quite often.
Well, they were usually to pensioners. They're at the end of the year, and we're running surpluses. At this time, the government's giving it to a large number of people across various demographics. They're running a $44 billion deficit. Australians are going to be upset about the fact that the government is yet again wasting money.
You constantly talk about the size of the debt and the size of the debt deficit. It will top out around about 9.6% of GDP, which by international standards is quite low.
Well, you know why this is an untruthful budget? The government's claiming to get back to surplus, and yet the debt is continuing to grow. They're going to come back to Parliament and ask to increase the credit card limit to $300 billion from the current $250. Now, if you're running real surpluses, you wouldn't be increasing the credit card limit. So not even they believe they're going to have a surplus.
So can you give us your path back to surplus, which is obviously going to be a lot harsher than what we've seen from the government today? You cannot constantly say that they're not going hard enough and then not put up any kind of proposal.
Well, the government's claimed that every budget would be a tough budget. Every year Wayne Swan's delivered a budget, he said it'd be a tough budget. I'm waiting for that tough budget.
And your first budget will be tougher than anything that Wayne Swan's ever delivered?
Well, the fact is, obviously look at the circumstances, but in the circumstances I will not be promising what I cannot deliver.
But it will be tougher than anything that Wayne Swan's delivered.
Well, if you want to get the economy under control, if you want to inoculate us against some of the volatility out of Europe, you've got to have a tough budget. And this government talks tough, but it never delivers. It's sending a confused signal to Australians.
But just to get the ground rules straight, you will not only talk tough, you will be tough.
Well, we always try to deliver on our word. That's what we do as Liberals. We deliver on our word. Labor makes promises, but it doesn't deliver.
So where will you start?
Well, the fact is, as I've said before, and interestingly, there's still 20,000 more public servants in Canberra today than what Labor inherited in 2007.
So you cut 20,000 jobs from the public service?
We have said we'll have to cut the size of the public service. Because
So
I
of
think
that
it
magnitude?
is. Sorry, if I can just finish. It is unfair to ask Australians to cut back on their budgets when the federal government's not cutting back on theirs. And they've got a surge of tax revenue. He talks about what he might have had in a distant Disneyland world. The bottom line is today, as of today, he's getting a surge of $39 billion in revenue to go from a $44 billion deficit to a surplus. But he'll never deliver the surplus.
Just to see if you agree with the Treasurer on one thing, do you believe that we do live in very uncertain times, that at any stage from Europe we might experience a shock that will send another shockwave around the world and have a material effect on our budget?
Absolutely, and that's what I've been warning of.
So what if you are cutting in that kind of environment?
Well, you've obviously got to take into account the circumstances.
And will you take those into account?
Yes, of course.
So you can't really say what kind of budget your first budget will be?
Well, look, Chris, we can play these semantics. The bottom line is I want the government to tell the truth in the budget, and it's not.
Sure, but you constantly keep saying that about the government, but we could have an election by your own measure by the end of this year, isn't that true?
Well, let's hope so.
And if that's the case, shouldn't we be seeing by now something more from you than just wait and see?
Well, there's still another scheduled budget before the next election.
Can you give us one area of government that you've decided on now where you will make genuine cuts, and can you give us some sort of detail?
Well, I've just told you.
So you'll cut 20,000 by 20,000?
We will cut the public service. And we've already said that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's one class. We will get rid of the carbon tax. We will get rid of the mining tax. We will ease the burden on families. But we'll do it in a responsible way. And we won't make promises we don't deliver. Tonight, we saw the government dump 5 different initiatives associated with their mining tax.
And we've
5 initiatives.
And we've seen you dump one.
And we've seen the government walk away from their original forecast on the mining tax.
And you've walked away from the Millennium Goals. You've walked away from the idea that we'll be increasing overseas aid. So they've dumped 5 and you've dumped 1.
Well, look, I'm not getting into that sort of game other than to say I want the budget papers to tell the truth. They've fudged the numbers. We warned they would fudge the numbers. The bottom line is they're not telling the truth about the state of the budget. This is a promise they're never going to deliver. And you and I and everyone else out there knows, Chris, that Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan aren't going to be around to see whether they actually end up delivering a surplus.
And Joe Hockey, you can guarantee us that when you are Treasurer, something that you certainly expect and your leader expects and a lot of Australia expects, that you will set a higher standard, that you won't do any of these things when you're in government.
Well, that's right. I will aim to deliver. I will deliver on what I promised, mate.
Can we just go through briefly the things that you think from what you've seen that you will support in this budget and the things that you won't? So you're saying you will not support the school kids bonus?
But we are inclined to support the changes to the family tax benefit and allowances because we know it's going to have an impact. The carbon tax is going to have an impact on families. We'll be very responsible about that.
What about means testing of anything?
Well, give me the example.
But means testing as a rule, because you were talking recently about we've got to end the entitlement society. So do you think that means testing is a good thing?
As a principle, yes. As a principle, yes.
And so that's the sort of thing that you would support in this budget as well?
Yeah, we'll be very responsible.
Any particular bits that you want to pick off apart from what you've just said?
Well, we want the government to separate out the increase in the debt limit from $250 billion to $300 billion. From our perspective, there is no justification for increasing the credit card limit of the Commonwealth Government whilst they're claiming to live within their means.
Joe Hockey, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
And that wraps up our coverage of Budget 2012 on ABC One for now, but stay tuned for more analysis on ABC News 24.